When I first started designing armor for the Power Fantasy universe, one of the main constraints I set myself was to not use chainmail, and see if I could still design armor that was effective. Since then, I've had a lot of people comment on its absence, and replying to them has pushed me to think more about my reasoning for not including it, and ultimately inspired me to take some time and actually implement it into the world. But before I get into it, I'd first like to talk about chainmail itself, as my understanding of it has developed pretty substantially compared to when I started this channel. Chainmail, which I'll refer to as just mail, is a type of armor that I think is easily misunderstood. The common perception of mail's effectiveness seems to be that it's strong against slashing and cutting, but can be easily defeated by any attack intended to pierce. The reality, however, is that mail is actually very resistant to penetration, which is why in history we see weapons specifically designed to get through it, such as bodkin arrowheads and rondel daggers. Instead, the crucial weakness of mail is its lack of structure, offering very little protection against blunt force trauma, and relying on padded garments to cushion impacts. This flexibility does come with an advantage though, as it allows mail to protect joints and other weak spots without impeding mobility, synergizing well with more rigid forms of armor. The reason I'm talking about this is that prior to looking into it more, I was under the misconception that padded textile armor, such as gambeson, could offer similar protection to mail, and this informed my earlier thinking as to mail's place in Power Fantasy. Now though, having done more research and seen practical tests of both, as well as talking about it with people far more knowledgeable than myself, I can see they offer very different benefits and drawbacks, from their performance in combat all the way to their sourcing and maintenance, all of which are variables I want to factor into my writing. Another interesting point of discussion regarding mail is its cost. Mail is often seen as being cheap, especially when compared with plate armor, and there's a variety of reasons why people might have this impression, but it really isn't true. In the case of Europe, by the time plate armor started seeing use, mail had already been produced and recycled for many centuries, perhaps feeding a perception of it being common and obsolete. However, producing mail from scratch is a seriously labor-intensive process, and with the cost of iron itself being high, commissioning new mail would have usually been prohibitively expensive for those outside the nobility. One of mail's great benefits in this regard is how easy it was to maintain, repair, and recycle into new pieces, extending its life, and meaning that many would inherit their armor as opposed to buying it themselves. However, in a society that doesn't have this cultural relationship with mail, these generational benefits can't be realized, and this brings us to mail's position in Power Fantasy. The way I've chosen to implement mail into the world of Power Fantasy is that in Chainmail, the region I'm focusing on developing, is not a native technology. Instead, it was first imported from much further east, with domestic production taking hold only in the later centuries of the 500-year timeline. Some mail finds its way in via sea trade to the south, but the main vector of goods and expertise is across the steppe to the north. Steppe warriors make good use of mail, and it's with the nomadic Khan Empire's expansion that knowledge of it spreads further south and west. Mail never sees widespread use by soldiers within Chainmail, with the technology remaining exclusive to the wealthiest combatants, who can afford the steep commission of ordering it new. Since other types of armor, such as lamella, brigandine, and eventually plate, already see mainstream use by the time mail is introduced, its use remains supplementary, curtailing demand and keeping the price high. A factor that limited mail's usefulness for a long time was the dominance of cavalry, especially mounted archers, against which the aforementioned types of armor could offer better protection. Then, as pike and shot tactics brought close infantry combat back to the forefront, the demand for mail among the elite increased accordingly. Visually, the main reason you don't see characters wearing mail, even those who can afford it, is that the fashion within Chainmail is to wear decorative garments with armor, so mail is most often worn covered. The people of this land have a rich culture of working with textiles, and they like to display their status, wealth and character with the patterns and colors worn with their armor. So, the reason why you never see chainmail in Power Fantasy, or at least in Chainmail, is that it's an expensive commodity, and the few who can afford it wear it concealed. In future though, I definitely want to include mail more in what I draw, especially for other cultures who wear it exposed, such as nomadic steppe warriors, and others further east. Having now learned so much more about it compared to when I started this channel, I've really come to appreciate it, and it introduces a lot of interesting questions and challenges for further developing this world. Thanks for watching, and thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon. If you're new here and think what I'm doing is interesting, make sure to subscribe so you can keep up with future videos. Anyway, that's all from me. See you next time.